My name is Simone Ardell and I am 33 years old. 9 years ago, my mother stood in the doorway of my apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina, with a cardboard box in her arms and told me that if I did not give up custody of my younger sister Blythe, who was 11 years old, who had been living with me for 4 months, who had started eating breakfast again and sleeping through the night for the first time in 2 years, she would call the Department of Social Services and report me for educational neglect. Blythe had missed 14 days of school while she was living with me. She had missed them because she had been in the hospital with a fractured wrist that our mother had not taken her to have treated. The cardboard box my mother was holding contained Blythe's clothes. She had already packed them. She had driven 40 minutes from our hometown of Garner to my apartment door, packed the box herself while I was at work, and was standing there when I came home at 6:15 on a Tuesday evening holding my sister's folded shirts and her library books and a stuffed rabbit named Clover that Blythe had slept with since she was 3 years old. She had not called ahead. She had not knocked. She had used the spare key I had given her the previous Christmas in a moment of goodwill I would spend years regretting. But here is what my mother did not know that evening. 3 weeks earlier, I had driven Blythe to the Wake County Department of Social Services myself. I had sat in a waiting room for 2 hours and 40 minutes with my sister beside me, her casted wrist in a pale blue sling, and I had given a formal statement to a family services caseworker named Diane Pollock. I had brought a folder. It had 11 items inside. I had been keeping that folder for 8 months. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story is speaking to something real in you. Drop your city and the time it is where you are in the comments. I read every single one of those, and knowing where you are when you hear this matters to me more than I can say. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Back to Garner, North Carolina, and a house on Finch Road, and a childhood that taught me very early that love in my family was not distributed equally. It was rationed. My mother, Carolyn Ardell, grew up in Johnston County and never quite forgave herself for leaving it. She talked about her hometown the way some people talk about a person they loved and lost, with a reverence that was also a wound. She married my father, Dale Ardell, when she was 22. He was a quiet man who worked maintenance for the county school system and spent his weekends rebuilding small engines in the garage. He smelled like motor oil and ivory soap, and he almost never raised his voice. Those are the things I remember most about him, because he died of a heart attack on a Thursday morning in March when I was 9 years old and Blythe was not yet born. My mother remarried 3 years later. His name was Roy Castine. He worked in commercial roofing. He was not a cruel man in any obvious way, but he had a talent for making you feel like a guest in your own home. He and my mother had Blythe together in the spring of the year I turned 12. I want to be careful here, because this story is not about Roy and it is not about my mother's grief over my father. It is about something simpler and older than either of those things. It is about the way some families decide, without ever saying it out loud, which child is the one that counts. From the time I was small, I understood that I was the practical one. I was the one who helped with dishes and remembered permission slips and did not require much. My mother had a way of expressing pride in me that was really just a description of my usefulness. Simone doesn't complain, She used to tell people. Simone handles things. I heard that sentence so many times growing up that I eventually stopped hearing it as a compliment and started hearing it for what it was. A job description. There was a woman in our neighborhood named Eunice Pardee. She was my father's aunt, which made her my great-aunt, though I never called her anything but Eunice. She was 71 when I was 9. A retired middle school librarian with silver hair she wore in a thick braid down her back in a house that smelled like wood smoke and old paperback books. She had a front porch with 2 rocking chairs and a wind chime made of blue glass that she had bought at a craft fair in Wilmington in 1987 and never replaced. Eunice saw me. That is the only way I know how to say it. She saw me the way you see a person when you are actually looking, not just checking that they are still there. I started spending Saturday afternoons at her house when I was 10. She taught me to play chess and to make her mother's biscuit recipe and to use the Dewey Decimal System the way other people use a compass. She had an opinion about everything: zoning laws, bird migration, the proper way to core an apple. And she shared those opinions with me like I was a full-grown person whose thoughts on the matter were worth hearing. When I was 13, she said something to me that I carried for 20 years. We were sitting on her porch on a September afternoon, the blue glass chime turning in a slow breeze, and I had just told her that my mother had signed Blythe up for a dance class but said there was no money for my drama club fee. Eunice was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Simone, a person who is always useful to other people has to be very careful that she doesn't let them mistake her usefulness for her worth. Those are not the same thing. Don't you ever let anyone confuse them." I wrote that down when I got home. I still have the notebook. Eunice died in January, 2 years before any of this happened. She was 85 years old and she went quietly, in her own bed, in the house on Finch Road that she had lived in for 53 years. I was the one who sat with her in the last 2 weeks. I drove to her house every evening after work and I sat beside her bed and I read to her from a collection of Willa Cather stories she had kept on her nightstand since 1974. She died on a Sunday morning while I was reading. I finished the page before I called anyone. I think she would have wanted me to. What I did not know until 3 weeks after her funeral was that Eunice had spent the last 4 years of her life working quietly with an attorney in Raleigh named Gerald Fitch. She had established a small trust in my name. She had written a letter to accompany it. She had told Gerald Fitch to contact me when she was gone and not before, and she had made him promise not to tell my mother or anyone else in the family that it existed. But I am getting ahead of myself. Before the trust, before Gerald Fitch, before the folder with 11 items, there was the summer Blythe was 11. I need to tell you about Blythe. She was the kind of child who noticed everything. She kept a nature journal. She could identify 17 species of birds by their calls alone. She had a gap between her front teeth and she laughed with her whole face and she was, without question, the best person in my family. She had Roy's last name on paper but she was entirely her own person, curious and careful and braver than anyone gave her credit for. She called me in early June. I was 24 years old, living in Raleigh, working as a paralegal at a small family law firm called Tanner and Birch. I had been there for 2 years. I was good at it. I was the person the attorneys called when they needed something found, something filed, something tracked across 3 jurisdictions without a single error. I was, as my mother would have said, handling things. Blythe called me at 8:30 on a Friday night, and I knew immediately from the quality of the silence before she spoke that something was wrong. She told me she had fallen. That was what she said first. She said she had fallen off the back porch and her wrist hurt and she had not told Mom because Mom was tired. I asked her how long it had been hurting. She said 4 days. I drove to Garner that night. I picked her up from the house while my mother was asleep and I took her to the urgent care on Timber Drive. The X-ray showed a clean fracture at the distal radius. The attending physician, a woman named Dr. Keene, asked Blythe twice how she had hurt herself. Blythe said she fell. Dr. Keene looked at me over Blythe's head and I looked back at her and neither of us said the thing we were both thinking, but Dr. Keene wrote something in the chart. I took Blythe home with me that night. I told my mother the next morning. My mother said she had not realized it was that serious. She said Blythe was dramatic sometimes. She said she appreciated me helping out but that Blythe would be coming home at the end of the week. Blythe stayed with me for 4 months. I want to be honest about what those 4 months were. They were hard. I was 24 years old and I had a 1-bedroom apartment and a paralegal salary and no idea what I was doing. I bought a twin-air mattress and set it up in my living room and I drove Blythe to school every morning and I packed her lunch and I helped her with her homework at my kitchen table every evening. I learned to make macaroni and cheese from scratch because she said the box kind tasted like cardboard. I read her nature journal entries out loud to her while she fell asleep, which was something she asked me to do and which I will not apologize for. She started eating breakfast again in the 2nd week. She started sleeping through the night by the end of the 1st month. She found a bird she had never seen before in the parking lot of my apartment complex. A brown creeper, she told me, very excited. And she drew it in her journal with colored pencils and labeled every part of it in her careful handwriting. I was not trying to take her from my mother. I want to be clear about that. I was trying to give her a few months of stillness. A few months of regular meals and regular sleep and a wrist that healed correctly. My mother had a different understanding of what I was doing. She called me every week during those 4 months. The calls had a pattern. They started with concern. How is she? Is she eating? Is she sleeping? And then they shifted, slowly, like a car changing lanes without a signal, into something harder. You always thought you knew better than me. You always had to be the one who fixed things. You never respected that she is my daughter. She is my daughter too, I said once. I meant it as a statement of love. My mother heard it as a declaration of war. I kept a record of those calls. I wrote down the dates and the approximate times and the things that were said. I did this because I am a paralegal and because I had spent 2 years working in family law and because I understood, in the quiet methodical part of my brain that never fully stopped working, that I might need it. By September, I had a folder with 11 items. Phone call logs. A copy of Blythe's medical record from the urgent care visit, which Dr. Keene had agreed to release to me with Blythe's verbal assent since I had been listed as the accompanying adult. A letter from Blythe's school counselor, a woman named Mrs. Featherstone, who had noticed a change in Blythe's demeanor since the start of the year and had written it down in the careful language of someone who also understood documentation. 2 photographs I had taken of Blythe's wrist in the first week, before the swelling fully resolved. A note Blythe had written me on a piece of notebook paper, unprompted, on a Wednesday evening while I was making dinner, that said, in her 11-year-old handwriting, "I feel safe here, Simone. Please don't make me go back yet." I did not put that note in the folder. I kept it separate. I kept it in the inside pocket of my winter coat, which I know is not a rational place to keep an important document but which felt right at the time. 3 weeks before my mother showed up with the cardboard box, I drove Blythe to the Wake County DSS office and I gave a formal statement to Diane Pollock. I brought the folder. I was calm. My hands did not shake. I noticed that. Diane Pollock was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the particular stillness of someone who has heard a great many difficult things and learned to receive them without flinching. She asked me clear questions and I gave her clear answers, and at the end of the meeting she said, "Ms. Ardell, I want you to know that what you've brought us today is thorough. We're going to open a formal inquiry." I drove home and made dinner and helped Blythe with a science worksheet about the water cycle and did not tell her any of it. And then, 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening at 6:15, I came home from work and found my mother standing in my doorway with a cardboard box full of my sister's things. I want to pause here for a moment and speak directly to you. If you have ever been the sibling who stayed, if you have ever been the one who drove at night, who kept the records, who showed up without being asked, who did the quiet, unglamorous work of protecting someone who could not fully protect themselves, and then been told by the very person you were protecting them from that you were the problem, I want you to know that I see you. I know what it costs to stay calm when every part of you wants to break. I know what it feels like to have your love for someone used as a weapon against you. Drop the word "stayed" in the comments if you have ever been that person. And if you think my mother had any idea what was coming, type "not yet." I am going to tell you what happened next. But first, please subscribe if you haven't already. These stories take a long time to tell and they deserve to be heard all the way through. Now, back to the story. I stood in the doorway of my own apartment and looked at my mother and at the cardboard box and at Blythe's stuffed rabbit sitting on top of the folded shirts, and I did not say anything for what I later estimated was about 12 seconds. My mother filled the silence. She said, "Blythe is coming home with me tonight. This has gone on long enough. You have no legal right to keep her here and you know it." I said, "Come inside." She did not come inside. She stayed in the doorway, which I understood was a choice. She wanted to be able to leave quickly, and she wanted the open door as a kind of permission she had already granted herself. "Simone," she said, "I know you think you're helping. But you are interfering in my family and it has to stop. If you don't let me take her tonight, I will call DSS tomorrow morning and report that she has been missing 14 days of school." She had counted the days. I had not realized she was counting. She missed 14 days, I said. 11 of them were because of the hospital follow-up appointments and the occupational therapy for her wrist. I have the documentation. My mother's expression shifted. Just slightly. A small recalibration. I want to see Blythe, she said. She's doing her homework. Simone. She's doing her homework, I said again. And she is going to finish it. And then you can speak with her. But I need you to hear something first. I went to my desk. I opened the second drawer from the bottom. I took out a manila envelope. Not the folder, the envelope, which held something different. And I walked back to the door and I held it out to my mother. She looked at it. She did not take it. What is that? She said. It was not quite a question. That is a copy of a formal inquiry opened by the Wake County Department of Social Services 3 weeks ago. Diane Pollock is the assigned caseworker. Her direct number is on the cover sheet. My mother's hand came up and gripped the doorframe. I watched her knuckles go pale. You called DSS on me. I gave a statement, I said. There is a difference. You had no right. Blythe had a fracture that went untreated for 4 days, I said. My voice did not waver. She lost 4 pounds in the 2 months before she came here. Her school counselor had already filed a concern report in August. I did not create this situation, Mom. I documented it. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. It had gone from hard to something more dangerous, which was soft. You have always thought you were better than me, she said. Ever since your father died. You've been waiting for a chance to take something from me. I had expected that. I had rehearsed my answer to it in my car on the way home from work for 3 weeks. I don't want to take anything from you, I said. I want Blythe to be safe. Those are not competing goals unless you make them competing goals. Blythe appeared in the hallway behind me. She had heard the voices. She was standing in her socks with her homework folder in her hands, and she looked at my mother and then at me, and her face did the thing it used to do when she was bracing for something. A small tightening around the eyes, a stillness in the jaw. My mother's expression changed completely when she saw her. The hardness dissolved. She said, "Baby, come here." Blythe looked at me. I said, "It's okay. Go ahead." Blythe walked to the door and my mother put the cardboard box down and hugged her, and I stood back and let it happen because whatever else was true, she was Blythe's mother and Blythe needed to know I understood that. My mother left that night without Blythe. She did not leave quietly. She said things in the parking lot that I will not repeat here, not because I have forgotten them but because they belong to a version of my mother that I have chosen not to carry forward. What I will tell you is that she drove away and I went back upstairs and Blythe was sitting on the air mattress with Clover in her lap, and she looked up at me and said, "Is she going to make me go back?" I sat down beside her. I said, "Not tonight." She nodded. She opened her nature journal. She showed me a drawing she had made that afternoon of the brown creeper, which she had now added a background to. The parking lot, the dumpster, the single scraggly tree it had been clinging to. She had written underneath it, in her careful hand, "Brown Creeper. Raleigh, NC. October 14th. Finds what it needs in unlikely places." I did not cry. I just looked at that drawing for a long time. I need to tell you about Eunice's letter now, because it matters to what came next. Gerald Fitch called me in February, 6 weeks after Eunice's funeral. He was a mild-voiced man in his 60s who had known Eunice for 30 years and who spoke about her with the careful reverence of someone who understood exactly who he had been trusted by. He told me about the trust, $44,000, which Eunice had built quietly over the last decade from her pension and her savings, and the sale of a small piece of land she had inherited from her own mother in 1991. He told me there was a letter. He read it to me over the phone because I was crying too hard to read it myself. "My dear Simone," it began. "I have been watching you handle things your whole life. You handle them beautifully. You handle them with more grace than anyone has a right to expect from a person who was never given the tools she deserved. But I need you to hear me say this clearly, because I am not sure anyone has ever said it to you plainly. You are not responsible for fixing what your mother broke. You are responsible for protecting what she might break next. You will know when the time comes. You will know what to do. You always have. The money is yours with no conditions and no strings and no one else's name on it. Use it to stand still long enough to breathe. Use it to build something that belongs entirely to you. And if the time comes when you need to stand in a doorway and hold your ground, stand there. Don't move an inch. I have never doubted you for a single day. All my love, always, Eunice. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment complex for 47 minutes after that call. The brown creeper tree was visible from where I was parked. I counted the bare branches. There were 11 of them. I want to tell you about the 18 months that followed, because they were not dramatic and they were not easy and they were the most important months of my life. The DSS inquiry proceeded. Diane Pollock was thorough and unhurried, and she did her job the way good people do jobs that matter. Carefully, without fanfare, without rushing toward a conclusion she had already decided on. She interviewed Blythe twice, once with me present and once alone. She interviewed my mother. She interviewed Mrs. Featherstone, the school counselor. She reviewed the medical records from the urgent care and from the 2 follow-up appointments and from the occupational therapy sessions. In April, 7 months after the inquiry opened, Diane Pollock called me and told me that the case had been substantiated. That was the word she used. Substantiated. It is a careful word. It means, we looked at what you brought us and we found it to be true. My mother was required to complete a parenting skills course and a family counseling program. She was required to have a home visit every 30 days for 1 year. She was not required to give up custody of Blythe, which I had never asked for. What I had asked for was for someone official to look at what was happening and say out loud that it was real. Someone did. Blythe went home in November, after 5 months with me. I drove her back on a Sunday afternoon. She had her nature journal and her colored pencils and clover and a new backpack I had bought her in September and a list of birds she had identified from my apartment window. 23 species, which she had documented with dates and descriptions and small careful drawings. She gave me a copy of the list before she got out of the car. She had written at the top, in her 11-year-old handwriting, "For Simone. So you remember what we saw?" I kept that list on my refrigerator for 8 years. I used part of Eunice's money to take a paralegal certification course that qualified me for a senior position at Tanner and Birch. I used another portion to put 3 months' rent in savings so that I would never be in a position where financial pressure could be used to move me. I kept the rest in a separate account that I thought of, privately, as the Standing Still Fund. Eunice had told me to use it to stand still long enough to breathe. I took her at her word. Over the next several years, I watched my mother from a careful distance. She completed the parenting program. She completed the counseling. The home visits ended after 12 months. Blythe called me every Sunday and I called her every Wednesday, and we talked about birds and school and the nature journal, which had grown to 4 volumes by the time she was 14. My mother and I were not close. We were not estranged. We existed in the careful middle distance that sometimes passes for a relationship when the real thing is not available. I met a man named Theo Rains when I was 27. He was a civil engineer who had grown up in Durham and who had the particular quality of stillness that I had spent my whole life recognizing in people worth knowing. He was the first person I told the whole story to. All of it. The folder, the doorway, the cardboard box, Eunice's letter. And he listened to all of it without flinching, and then he said, "You did the right thing. I want you to know that I know that." 4 words. I know that. They landed somewhere I had not known was still waiting. We married in a small ceremony in Eunice's backyard. I had inherited the house along with the trust, on a Saturday in October when I was 29 years old. Blythe was my maid of honor. She was 14 and she wore a green dress, and she cried at the ceremony and then immediately denied that she had been crying. Theo's mother walked me down the aisle. I had not invited my own mother. I had thought about it for a long time and I had decided that the wedding was a place I needed to feel safe, and I was not yet sure I could feel safe with her there. She called me 3 days afterward. I let it go to voicemail. Now I need to tell you about what happened 8 months ago, because that is what this story is really about. Blythe turned 19 last spring. She had been accepted into the biology program at NC State, which is in Raleigh, which meant she was going to be 20 minutes from my house. She was going to study ornithology. She had already been in contact with a professor there who ran a bird banding station in the Piedmont. She was, in every way that mattered, exactly who she had always been going to be, given the right conditions. My mother called me in March, 2 months before Blythe's graduation from high school. I had not spoken to my mother in 14 months. The last time we had spoken, it had been a brief and careful conversation about Blythe's college applications, And it had ended when my mother said something that I filed away without responding to. She said, "I hope you know that everything you did back then almost destroyed this family." I had said, "I hope Blythe gets into her first choice school." And I had ended the call. When she called in March, I let it ring. She called again 2 hours later. I answered the second call. She said she needed to talk to me about something important. She said she wanted to meet in person. She said she thought it was time for the family to come back together, especially with Blythe starting college and this being such an important milestone. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking and that she had some things she wanted to say. I said, "All right. I want to be honest about why I agreed to meet her. It was not because I believed she had changed. It was not because I needed her apology. It was because Blythe was going to be in Raleigh, 20 minutes from my house, and I understood that if my mother and I remained in open conflict, Blythe would spend the next 4 years managing the distance between us. I did not want that for her. I agreed to meet my mother because Blythe deserved to start her adult life without being the bridge between two people who could not look at each other. We met at a restaurant in Garner called the Millstone, which is a family place with booths and a Tuesday lunch special and the kind of lighting that is neither warm nor harsh. My mother was already there when I arrived. She was sitting in a corner booth wearing a gray cardigan and she looked smaller than I remembered, which happens with people sometimes. They shrink in the years you are not watching. She had a folder with her. I noticed it immediately. A manila folder, thicker than I expected, sitting on the table beside her water glass. I sat down. I ordered coffee. I waited. She began with the things she had prepared. She said she had done a lot of reflecting. She said the parenting program had helped her understand some things about herself. She said she knew she had not always been fair to me when we were growing up, that she had leaned on me too much, that she had not seen me clearly. She said she was sorry for that. I listened. I did not interrupt. I counted the ceiling tiles while she talked. There were 48. Then she put her hand on the folder. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And I need you to hear me out before you respond." "All right," I said. "Blythe is going to need a lot of support in college. Financial support. I can't. Roy and I are not in a position to cover all of it. Her financial aid covers tuition but not housing, not books, not the rest of it. I've been looking at the numbers and there's a gap of about $8,000 a year." I did not say anything. "I know that Eunice left you something," she said. "I know there was a trust. Gerald Fitch's name was in the probate records and I looked into it. I'm not asking you to give me money. I'm asking you to help Blythe. You love her. I know you do. And she needs this." She opened the folder. Inside were printed pages, financial aid award letters, cost of attendance breakdowns, a handwritten list of monthly expenses. She had done the math. She slid the top page toward me. I looked at it. I looked at it for a long time. Here is what I want to tell you about that moment. My mother had just spent 4 minutes apologizing to me and then opened a folder asking me to fill an $8,000 a year gap in my sister's college expenses. She had framed it as being about Blythe. She had used the one person in the world she knew I would do anything for as the reason I should say yes. And she had done it in a restaurant, in public, with a folder full of documents, which is a technique I recognized because I had spent years watching attorneys use it. She had no idea that I had already set up a college savings account for Blythe 4 years earlier. She had no idea that it contained enough to cover housing and books and the gap in her financial aid for all 4 years. She had no idea because I had not told anyone. Not Theo, not Blythe, not anyone. Because I had learned from Eunice that some things are protected by their silence. She also had no idea that Blythe and I had spoken on the phone the previous Sunday, as we did every Sunday, and that Blythe had told me about the conversation she had had with our mother the week before. The conversation in which our mother had told Blythe that she was going to talk to me about helping with college costs, and in which Blythe had said, "Mom, Simone already told me she's going to help. She set something up years ago." And our mother had said, "What do you mean? She set something up?" And Blythe had said, "She told me when I was 15. She said she was saving for it and I didn't need to worry." Our mother had known, when she called me in March, that I had already made arrangements for Blythe. She had known when she sat down in this booth. She had prepared the folder anyway. I looked at my mother across the table. I looked at her carefully, the way you look at something you have been trying to understand for a very long time. I said, "I'm glad you brought the folder." She blinked. I reached into my bag. I took out a slim navy blue binder. I set it on the table between us. "I have one too," I said. She looked at the binder. She did not touch it. "Blythe called me on Sunday," I said. "She told me about the conversation you two had last week. She told me she had already told you that I set up a savings account for her 4 years ago. So I want to understand something. Did you bring this folder because you needed the information in it, or because you wanted to see whether I would say yes to something you already knew the answer to?" My mother's face went through several things in rapid succession. I watched them happen. "Simone. I'm not angry," I said. And I meant it. My voice was level. My hands were flat on the table. "I'm not angry, and I'm not going to make a scene. But I want to be honest with you about something, because you said you wanted to be honest with me." I opened the binder. The first page was a printout of the savings account statement for Blythe's college fund. I turned it to face her. "This account has been open since Blythe was 15, I said. "It has enough in it to cover her housing, her books, and her living expenses for 4 years. It is in her name. I am the secondary account holder. You are not on it and you never will be, not because I am punishing you, but because I set it up to protect her and I am not going to change the structure of a protection." My mother's eyes were on the page. "The second thing I want to say," I continued, "is that I accepted your apology. I want you to know that. Not because it fixed anything, but because I don't want to carry the weight of not accepting it. That is for me, not for you. I turned to the second page of the binder. It was a single sheet. A letter I had written the week before, 2 paragraphs, printed on plain paper. The third thing, I said, is this. I would like us to have a relationship. A real one, not a managed one. Not one where we see each other at Blythe's graduation and make conversation about the weather. I would like to have a relationship where we are honest with each other, which means I need you to stop using Blythe as a reason to ask me for things. She is not a reason. She is a person. If you want to ask me for something, ask me directly. I slid the letter across the table. My mother picked it up. She read it. I watched her read it. I counted 16 seconds. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. Not performing. Actually wet. I didn't think you'd have anything prepared, she said. I'm a paralegal, I said. I always have something prepared. There was a long silence. A waitress came and refilled my coffee and left without saying anything, which I appreciated. Blythe loves you more than she loves anyone, my mother said finally. Her voice was quiet. I know that. I've known it for a long time. I used to be jealous of it. I'm not anymore. She stopped. I just wanted to be the one who helped her. You can be, I said. You can call her on Sundays. You can go to her bird banding station and let her show you what she's learning. You can show up to things. That is how you help her. Not by managing the money. My mother nodded. Slowly. I want to be honest with you about what that lunch was and what it wasn't. It was not a reconciliation. It was not the scene where everything was healed and we walked out into the parking lot and embraced and started over. It was 2 women sitting in a corner booth in a family restaurant in Garner, North Carolina, being more honest with each other than they had been in 33 years. It was imperfect and uncomfortable and real. My mother did not apologize for the doorway moment. She did not apologize for the 14 months of silence or the voicemail she had left me the week after my wedding, which I had never responded to. She apologized for the years of making me feel like a function rather than a daughter, and she apologized for using Blythe as leverage, and I believed both of those apologies because they were specific and because she did not follow them with a request. We sat in that restaurant for 2 hours and 11 minutes. We talked about Blythe's ornithology program. We talked about Eunice, which neither of us had done before in any real way. My mother said, she always liked you better than she liked me. I said, she liked people who were paying attention. You were busy. It was the kindest true thing I could think of to say. I paid for lunch. Not as a statement. Just because I had gotten there first and had my card out. In the parking lot, my mother stopped beside her car and looked at me. She said, I don't know how to do this differently. I want to try, but I don't know how. I said, neither do I. But Blythe is going to be 20 minutes from my house starting in August. We're going to have a lot of chances to figure it out. She nodded. She got in her car. I got in mine. I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes. I thought about Eunice's letter. I thought about the blue glass wind chime, which I had taken down from her porch and rehung on my own porch after she died, and which was turning in a slow October breeze the morning I had read her letter for the first time. I thought about Blythe at 11, in her socks, with her homework folder, standing in the hallway and looking at me to see if it was safe. It was safe. It had always been safe, as long as I was standing there. Let me step out of the story for just a moment and speak to you directly one more time. I know that some of you watching this have been the one who kept the records. The one who drove at night. The one who made the call that no one else was willing to make, and then spent years being told you were the problem for making it. I know that some of you protected someone and were punished for it and never received a single acknowledgement that you did the right thing. I want to say this plainly, the acknowledgement matters less than the outcome. Blythe is at NC State. She is studying birds. She calls me every Sunday. She is safe. That is the outcome. The acknowledgement, when it came, was real and I accepted it. But it was not the point. It was never the point. If you have been the person who protected someone at a cost to yourself, drop the word Eunice in the comments. I will read every one. Blythe started her program in August. She came to my house for dinner every Thursday. She and Theo argued cheerfully about which was the better engineering, structural or ecological, and she always won because she had better evidence. She brought her nature journal to show me new entries. By November, it was volume 7. My mother came to Raleigh for Blythe's first semester end-of-year dinner, which we held at my house. It was the first time my mother had been inside my home. She stood in the doorway for a moment and looked around, and then she came in and sat at my kitchen table, and Theo poured her a glass of sweet tea and Blythe showed her the brown creeper drawing from volume 1, the original one, from the parking lot in 2015. My mother looked at the drawing for a long time. She was 11 when she drew this, I said. I know, my mother said. She did not say anything else about it. She did not need to. After dinner, while Theo and Blythe were doing the dishes, my mother sat on my porch and looked at the blue glass wind chime. She did not say anything about it for a long time. Then she said, I always thought she liked that chime because it was pretty. But she used to say it was because it made a sound even when you couldn't feel the wind. I sat down in the other chair. The one that had always been there. She told me that too, I said. We sat there for a while. The chime turned. The night was cool and still, and the sound it made was small and clear and exactly the same as it had always been. I am not going to tell you that everything is fixed. It isn't. My mother and I are still learning how to be in the same room without the old architecture of our relationship pressing down on us. There are conversations we have not had and may never have. There is a version of my childhood that she and I will never agree on. That is true and it is fine. I am not looking for agreement. I am looking for a way to stand in the same room with the people I love without losing myself in the process. Eunice taught me that. She taught me to stand still. She taught me that my usefulness was not my worth. She taught me, without ever using the word, that documentation is a form of love. That when you write something down, when you date it and file it and keep it, you are saying, this happened, this was real, this person was here and what was done to her mattered. Blythe's college fund account is still in her name. She does not need to ask anyone for anything. She can study birds for 4 years without worrying about the gap in her financial aid. That is what I wanted for her. That is what Eunice wanted for me. If you are watching this and you recognize yourself in any part of it, if you have been the one who kept the folder, who drove at night, who stood in a doorway and did not move, I want you to know that the standing still is enough. You do not have to win loudly. You do not have to be acknowledged. You just have to stay in the doorway. The truth is patient. It waits for the right room. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from tonight. Tell me your time and your city and whether you are folding laundry or sitting in the quiet after a long day. I want to know you are there. And if this story reached something in you, if it found the place where you have been holding something you were never sure anyone else would understand, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit subscribe, drop a comment, and I will see you in the next one.